Wargaming made a few balance changes to some commanders in the August 2025 update to World of Warships Legends. One of the changes was to a unique skill that, as of this moment, is only found on the IJN destroyer commander Kurita. You can see the build here. I've got him at rank 14, legendary 3, so of course that ranking is going to affect the numbers. But the skill is in his legendary row. We've got it selected. It's called Evil Sparks. For those of you who are not familiar with the skill, Kurita is the only commander that has it. It was added to the game years ago, along the same time frame as Equilibrium of Power was added on to more cruiser commanders, and Evil Sparks does a similar thing to that skill. Well, really the same thing, I suppose you could say. It increases the destroyer's high explosive penetration. After the buff, and at this rank, the increase to the high explosive penetration is 75%. Quite a large number, but of course you have to trade something for that, namely the HE Alpha. It gives you a 75% buff to penetration, but a 25% nerf to alpha. And of course, we're testing this out on the Kitakaze, an excellent IJN destroyer gunboat, and we're going to have a pretty good game with it, but I argue that the results of this game are mostly down to the Kitakaze itself being an excellent ship, not so much the effects that Evil Sparks has on the guns here. Now we're pushing out to this Charlie Cap, and right away we're going to come into some contact with some enemy destroyers, and we're also going to see the main downside to running Evil Sparks, and ultimately the reason I wouldn't recommend running it. Now notice there, too, that initial salvo against the Minigumo was with HE, and the individual shell hits didn't yield a lot of damage. I think we ended up with just over 1,000 points of damage after all those shells hit, and then we switch to AP and we go from 1,000 to 4,000. If you are going to run Evil Sparks and you're trying to fight other destroyers, that 25% nerf to the HE Alpha is hugely significant. It reduces the maximum HE damage down to 900. Now you can modify that, if you'd like, with the Mortar skill, but I haven't elected to do that here. If you put Mortar on, then the HE Alpha goes from 900 to 1,056, only about 156 points of damage more. I don't think that is significant enough to justify the concealment nerf that Mortar gives, which is ultimately the reason I'm not running it. With Mortar active, I had my detect on the Kitakaze at 6 km, which I don't think is inherently that big of a problem. I do run some gunboat destroyers with concealments in that range. It's a disadvantage because everything outspots you, but with Evil Sparks in particular, well, take a look at this Minigumo. See how he blows out our engine and it's dead for 59 seconds? Well, we literally cannot move unless we repair it. And of course, we're spotted here. We do repair it now. But imagine for a moment if that cruiser out there, the A-Gear, had hit us again and broken the engine immediately. We would have been dead in the water for 60 seconds. If that happens to you in a destroyer like the Kitakaze, particularly when you're trying to fight other enemy destroyers, you get your engine taken out and you literally can't move, well, you're going to go back to port really, really quickly. And that is the main reason I don't think I can recommend using Evil Sparks, even after this buff. Unstoppable is a skill on Kurita's legendary row and every other destroyer in this game, and what it does is allow you to still move when your engine is taken out. There aren't too many mandatory skills in this game, I wouldn't say, but if there is something that's close to mandatory, it's got to be unstoppable. On literally every destroyer build, there still, to this day, is not a legendary destroyer skill that is worth taking over unstoppable, at least not in my mind. The only exception would be if you have a commander that in the upper skill tree, not in the legendary row, has a skill called Quick Fix, because that also allows you to maintain maneuverability when your engine has been broken. If you've got that, then you don't necessarily need to run Unstoppable in the legendary row. You can switch it to something else. There's very few commanders that actually have that, though, and unfortunately, Kurita isn't one. If Wargaming's goal with this buff to Evil Sparks was to encourage more people to use it, then I think in order to actually make that happen, Kurita's got to get Evil Sparks somewhere on the skill tree. Maybe in the second row of skills, he's only got two of them there, namely Mortar and Look at Me Now. Oh, and by the way, that I don't know if I fully explained why I'm not using Mortar. Yes, it gives you more damage. 1056 is certainly better than 900 on the HE Alpha, but if I'm spotted at 6 kilometers, every destroyer is going to outspot me, and if my engine gets taken out, well, as we've already seen, that could potentially be a death sentence. I think in that sequence where we did lose our engine, we probably would have perished if we weren't able to repair it. And if there were more ships around, I don't know what would have happened there. I think you can get great results with the Kitakaze in particular, even if you don't have Evil Sparks. And ultimately, all it does is increase the penetration of the HE shells, which to begin with, on the Kitakaze in particular, are already 30 millimeters. That's enough to penetrate the superstructure of every battleship. In some cases, it's enough to penetrate the deck and the bow armor, if you've got a battle cruiser, say. And then when it comes to actual cruisers, most of them don't have better than 30 millimeter plating on, their upper belt armors, their deck, not to mention their superstructures and bows. So that's enough to penetrate them, and of course, no problem versus enemy destroyers. Now, with Evil Sparks, you increase that penetration on the Kitakaze to an incredible 52.5 millimeters. That is enough to penetrate the deck armor of practically every battleship you're going to come across, even some of the more heavily armored cruisers. The Alaska here, if we shoot at him with the HE, and a number of other ships that we're going to shoot with the HE in this battle, you'll be able to see that these shells do pen practically everything. But of course, when they hit, you see two of them there do 650 damage. It's not a lot of damage that they're doing because of the massive cut to the HE Alpha. So whether that's worth it or not to have consistent penetrations on really armor surfaces that the Kitakaze would have penetrated anyway to begin with, I don't think that's worth it. I don't think there's any reason to run Evil Sparks, give up Unstoppable, even if it does increase the pen. We're going to come up against the Schlieffen here now. He's got light armor on the bow and in the superstructure, of course. I think it's only 27 millimeters. Without Evil Sparks, we would still be penetrating the bow and the superstructure. Now, though, we still get some shatters. Even though we are penning 52.5 millimeters of armor, Schlieffen's got some pretty heavy armor on his broadside, and I don't think his deck is quite as heavy as the rest of it, but you see, majority of our shells are still shattering here. So against heavily armored targets like German battleships or battle cruisers, I don't see the value. And then when it comes to fighting destroyers, well, you really have to rely on the AP, because everything with that low of an alpha strike is probably still going to out-DPM you, even if they have slower reloads and worse guns. It's going to be like sinking destroyers in slow motion if your HE only does up to 900 damage a pop. And of course, the HE is never going to deal its maximum damage. When it fully penetrates a destroyer, it's going to deal only a certain percentage of that 900, somewhere in the vicinity of probably about 300. Not exactly impressive. Now, at this point, this battle is winding down. We have managed to sink 3 enemy ships, but again, that comes down to the Kitakaze just being an excellent ship. And of course, we've got the legendary reload mod installed so that every 30,000 damage we do, our DPM gets even better. That, I think, is an excellent module to have on the Kitakaze, and I don't, again, recommend running Evil Sparks on it. Some torpedoes out at the Conqueror. Looks like we lined them up pretty well, because those torpedoes are going to make contact and net us our 4th kill. Kraken here, up for grabs, in spite of running what I think is a suboptimal build on this particular destroyer. And there are 3 opportunities left floating for us to secure that Kraken, one of which is the last remaining enemy destroyer. I think a Vampire 2 that was last spotted in this general area at full HP, We're going to swing around here back toward the friendly spawn. Look for the Vampire 2, assuming he's headed in the direction of the Charlie Cap, although that's going to turn out to be incorrect. I have no idea what that guy's doing. But instead, we're going to head toward the Charlie Cap, and we do spot, or we have spotted, the Alaska and the other cruiser up there. Or perhaps it's more correct to say the Yamato has spotted them. So we're going to push up there thinking the Vampire 2 is in this direction anyway, and then we've got 3 different ships to potentially shoot at in order to secure our Kraken. Of course, we're only at 4,305 HP, so a couple salvos from something in return is going to send us back to port and not allow us to get our Kraken. Although, on the Kurita build, if you noticed, I do have Sims and Bergamini as the inspirations. I think that those are 2 excellent inspiration combos for a destroyer that wants to be a gunboat like this one, especially Bergamini. I find him and Sims together create sort of the best tank build you can get for a destroyer, and it's good, I'd say, for pretty much any gunboat. And even though we don't have somebody like Eric Bai, since we're not using the mortar skill, our concealment is a fairly respectable 5.4. There's the mostly full HP Vampire 2, but we hit 1,000 points before we can sink anybody and actually secure a Kraken. Maybe we should have kept focus fire on that Alaska for those last couple seconds. He was pretty low, and that could have gotten us our Kraken, but as it stands, we finish with a measly 3,356 base XP and a pitiful 4 kills. What a shame. What a terrible result from the Evil Sparks build on Kitakazi. Again, not worth using. Although if you're going to use it, you probably want to use it on this thing, because this is a fantastic destroyer. Hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.